we're in the midst of the restricted free agency signing period, right? And of course, there are contracts that age well and there are contracts that don't. So I thought I'd look back at last year's contracts and we can just take a look and see, does it make more sense to sign the short term or the long term? And the answer is it really depends on the player and it depends on the deal. So I took 10 players who signed as restricted free agents last year. There's no particular order to this. You'll notice it's not alphabetical. It's not even by how much money they make. It's just, yeah. And it started out with, all right, well, I want to talk about Clayton Keller. And then it became, well, why don't I just discuss numerous restricted free agents and look at it? Now, Clayton Keller, when he signs this contract last year, he said that's a lot of money and a lot of term. And people said no. He had a down year. It was his second year in the NHL, but he's a star. Now, is Clayton Keller going to be a star? At $7.15 million until 2028, they're still banking on it. But it's contracts like this as well, because they didn't sign him to that bridge contract last year, which kind of leave Arizona in a bad spot with the cap. $7.15 million. You have to think on a bridge contract, probably be more along the lines of what Werenski got, and then it might look a little bit better for them. Now, he has a no trade clause that kicks in 2024, 2025 for that season, and then it becomes a no movement clause 2 years after that. So it's a contract that's already tough to move because he had 70 games played this year, 17 goals, 27 assists, 44 points. Now, where it gets tricky is this is Arizona. The Arizona Coyotes, under Rick Tocchet, don't score a lot of goals. And depending on your opinion, it is either because of Tocchet's system or they just don't have a talented enough forward group to generate the offense necessary. Now, whether you want to put that on Keller, you want to put that on somebody else, you want to say Keller's numbers are down because of the environment he's in, the numbers are still not in a line to justify the $7.15 million yet. And of course, the argument is you're paying for later, you're paying for that potential. But to me, that's sort of like buying a lottery ticket where you're betting on what's going to happen later. And sure, you might hit and it might be a jackpot, but you can always lose on those contracts as well. So for right now, Clayton Keller's has not aged particularly well past year one. But we look at Patrick Laine right underneath, $6.75 million. So his cap hit's lower than Keller's, but he's up next year. And so it becomes a little bit tougher. One thing Arizona doesn't have to worry about is negotiating a contract with Clayton Keller until 2028. So they don't have to worry about negotiations. That's gone. With Laine, we're already seeing the issue cropped up again with the Winnipeg Jets, right? 68 games played this year, 28 goals, 35 assists, 63 points. Very good season. The interesting thing with Laine is that whenever we talk about him, it's what he's going to do, what he hasn't done yet. So going back to Keller, he doesn't seem to get the same level of, I don't know if encouragement's the right word, but he doesn't seem to get the same level of leeway. The leeway is much better for Laine than it is for Keller. But I would say that for Laine, those numbers, while they're good, they're not superstar, mega superstar level that was expected when he was drafted right behind Matthews. So for Laine, again, he's going to expect a raise, I would think, over $6.75 million. So he probably makes more than Keller on his next contract, which is likely not with the Winnipeg Jets. And then it's how long is that contract for? Is that an 8-year deal that he signed somewhere else? Is it a 7-year deal? Depends when he gets traded. All that other lovely stuff. But for Laine, we've got all this uncertainty, right? Now, Mitch Marner, I don't see the uncertainty with Marner. Marner makes $10.893 million a year. That's the cap hit. He is due to become an unrestricted free agent in 2025, which is noteworthy that he becomes a UFA. So for the Leafs, they didn't really buy any UFA years, and as Marner becomes, a prime, like a player in his prime, he could very well end up leaving. Now there's a no movement clause that kicks in 2023. So 3 years from now, that no movement clause kicks in. But I don't think that if the Leafs right now said we're open for business, we're listening to offers on Marner, I don't think that because of that cap hit, they would get the offers they'd want. So Marner's not going anywhere. I'm not suggesting he is. Just saying that it's a contract that's still tough for me to completely come to terms with because it is a lot of money. It didn't buy up the UFA years either. And then there's the no movement clause that kicks in 2023. Now, 59 games played this year, 16 goals, 51 assists, 67 points. No one will tell you that Mitch Marner is not one of the better passers in the NHL, not if they've watched him play. And I love Mitch Marner. He's my favorite Leaf. And I think he is at times their MVP. And I know I've had some flack for that in the past where people are like, how can he call him the MVP? How can he say that Marner's the MVP when you got Matthews and Tavares? And, well, watching them play, I think Marner drives the play a lot of the time. But, again, you're paying him. You're paying him now. You're paying him later. And for Marner, the cap hit is the highest one on the board. And the length of the contract is also on the longer side. So, again, and I know we've had this debate before. It's the reason I didn't put the Nylander contract on the board because we've talked about that one to death. But we'll see how this contract ages. And I honestly believe Marner is one of the better passers in the league, and he should be scoring 100 points a year. I legit think over an 82-game season, Marner should be a shoo-in for 100 points with the game he plays. And that 75 of those points should be assists. Brock Boeser. So Boeser's name's been brought up a lot in trade rumors. And honestly, I don't know that it ever really went away. So he has a $5.875 million cap hit until 2022. But it being a shorter term contract, I think Brock wants to stay in Vancouver long term. I don't know how the Canucks feel about keeping him long term and where they see him in their lineup. So this year, 57 games played, 16 goals, 29 assists, 45 points. I thought he had a decent year until the internet told me he didn't. But the interesting thing with Boeser is the contract's up in 2 years, and there's no clauses in there. There's no trade. There's no movement clause. And this is where players sometimes get mad. I'm not saying this happened here, but a player will sign a contract, and they might get told, it's fine. We're not going to trade you. So don't worry about the no trade. We'll just shake hands on it. It'll be fine. And then when there's no trade clause, they can absolutely get moved later, especially a year later. I don't think trading Boeser is in the best interest of the Canucks, but I would not be entirely surprised if they do it, and I won't have any opinion on the trade until it happens. But at that cap hit, I don't think it's awful. I think Boeser is still able to score 30. This year, obviously, the 16 goals stands out, the 45 points in 57 games. Not the points per game level you'd like to see Boeser at, but I don't think it's as bad as others may. So yeah, Boeser, short-term contract, and trade rumors are still out there, much like Laine on a short-term contract. Mikko Rantanen, $9.25 million a year. He is paid until 2025 under that contract. He has a modified no-trade clause that kicks in 2023. I don't think there's going to be a Colorado fan that says that he's not worth the $9.25 million. The thing is, when McKinnon's contract is up, he's going to make more than $9.25 million a year, and keeping that team together is going to be difficult once McKinnon's contract is up. Now, this year, Rantanen had 42 games, 19 goals, 22 assists, and 41 points. And like other players in 2019-2020, Rantanen had problems staying healthy. It's a Colorado thing. Almost everybody in Colorado had problems staying healthy. That contract, it's a high price. And again, the question with Rantanen, I could see people asking would be, well, does he generate a point a game because he plays with McKinnon, or is it because he's that good? I would say yes. I would say it's both. I would say Rantanen's good enough to play with McKinnon, and McKinnon definitely, I would think, helps his stats at least a little bit. But again, Colorado was not in a position where they had to worry about cap. They're getting there, right? His contracts come up, and Makar's comes up next year. That's a one that I think is going to be a very rich contract. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, Rantanen, 2025. I don't really have a problem with that contract at that cap hit, because while it's higher than almost everything else on the board, it's a longer term contract. It's still $1.6 million less than Marner's getting. And I think it's reasonable. And I think if Marner made the same as Rantanen, I think there'd be a lot less discussions of that contract. Kyle Connor, $7.14 million until 2026. So what's interesting with Connor is he gets more money than Laine for a longer term than Laine. But Laine took this as a show-me contract. So Laine, over a longer term, would have wanted more than $7.14 million. Now, there's a modified no-trade clause that kicks in 2024. So up until then, they can move him if they want to. They're not going to want to. 71 games played by Connor, 38 goals, 35 assists, 73 points. It wasn't that long ago that I said I thought Kyle Connor was a better player than Patrik Laine. And there was plenty of discussion at the time. I still feel that way. I still feel like Kyle Connor is a better player than Laine. I think he's a better all-around player than Laine. And this year he had 10 more goals. He only played 3 more games. So Connor had a pretty good season, and I think that contract's aging very well. He makes, $10,000 less a year than Keller, gets 2 less years on his contract, and he scored 73 points and Keller scored 44. So this is that when you're buying ahead of time and what you're expecting from the player, there can be a large divergence between what you expect and what you get. Jacob Trouba, $8 million a year for the Rangers, so he could not come to any kind of a long-term agreement with the Jets. It reminds me a lot of the Laine deal where we knew Trouba eventually was going to leave Winnipeg. It was just a matter of when. And then he'd sign these contracts. It might be an extension here, an extension there. And again, Jets fans would be like, hey, we're not trading Trouba. No, it's not going to happen. And then they did. Now, Trouba ends up going to the Rangers coming off of a 50-point season with the Winnipeg Jets. Absolute beast in 2018-2019. And I thought it would be hard for him to replicate that season. And it has been. Now, he now makes $8 million a year until 2026. So nice long-term contract. His no-movement clause kicks in for 2020, 2021. And then in 2024, it changes to a modified no-trade clause. This year in 70 games with the Rangers, 7 goals, 20 assists, 27 points. So his points per game dropped substantially, as I kind of expected it to, not this much. I think it'll come back up into the 40-point range next year. Again, that would depend on an 82-game season. Over a 48-game season, I'll say 20 points. But Trouba, I think, is an excellent defenseman. The one thing I always watch with the Rangers is it feels like every year it's a different defenseman's fault. And I find that strange. But it feels like every year there's a defenseman that is the one that's taking a majority of the blame for things going wrong with the New York Rangers. And so that defenseman gets cast off, and then there's a new guy the next year. So with Trouba, I'm not sure what year's going to be his, but at some point it will be, and at $8 million a year, that's part of the problem with making that kind of money. If you want to call it a problem. But one of the dangers of making that level of money, if I guess I could put it that way, is that you're going to eventually be the guy who gets blamed. It's going to be, hey, we're paying you $8 million a year. Why did that guy go around you and score that goal? Brayden Point. So in the short-term contracts region, Brayden Point takes less money to stay with the Tampa Bay Lightning on a shorter-term contract to help them with the cap. So the cap problems that Tampa Bay is currently stuck in, we saw this coming years ago. But with contracts signed by Stamkos, Kucherov, and Point, for a little less than they would have made on the market, it helped to delay the cap hell that Tampa currently finds themselves in. When you have a stacked roster like the Tampa Bay Lightning, eventually it's going to happen. Now, Point is signed for 2 more years at $6.75 million, the same amount of money as Patrik Laine. The better of the two players is Brayden Point. Point, 66 games, 25 goals, 39 assists, 64 points. The interesting thing is, points per game, very close to Laine. Laine scores more goals, but Brayden Point being a center, being a guy who drives the action, and he's got that cup ring, I'm guessing that in 2022, his raise is probably going to be more than that of Patrik Laine. Just throwing that out there. But again, it means that in 2022, we're again going to see the Tampa Bay Lightning trying to figure out the cap and trying to figure out how to keep everybody. And this is why I did a video not too long ago on what if they trade Stamkos. Because at some point, one of the big names would have to go in order to pay for everybody else. It's just, that's the way the salary cap works. It punished the Chicago Blackhawks, and I think it robbed them of having 4 Stanley Cups rather than 3. And it's just, that's the way it's set up, is that no team can just hoard players and pay them, excessive amounts of money. Now, Point is, I think, worth whatever dollar value he ends up getting from Tampa. I would think that next year, as soon as they can negotiate an extension with him, they will. So when we're a year out, he will start talking to them about an extension, and I think it's going to be a very generous one. Zach Werenski. Werenski signed a contract that we knew was a bargain at the time. Till 2022, he's paid $5 million. one of the better defensemen in the National Hockey League. Definitely one of the best goal-scoring defensemen in the National Hockey League. So for $5 million, he's one of the lowest paid guys on the board. And his contract is longer than that of Laine's. It's the same amount of time as Brayden Point's. He gets paid almost $1 million less than Brock Boeser, and the term is the same. 63 games, 20 goals, 21 assists, 41 points. So Werenski, betting on himself last year in 2022, likely to get a pretty large raise. The interesting thing, too, is this. So as we go through this pandemic-interrupted season, which caused the Stanley Cup to be awarded in September, and now we're seeing a pushed back season for next year, it's going to affect how much money Laine gets in 2021. It has to. Or it restricts which teams are able to offer him the kind of money he wants. He's the only one due in 2021. Boeser, Point, and Werenski are all due in 2022. They could still be feeling the effects of this. Their contracts could be affected, and they could end up having to take less money or another bridge contract rather than a long-term extension. Whereas everybody else on the board, the earliest is 2025. So 2025 for Rantanen, for Marner, for Colin White here, who we're going to get to, and for Rantanen. So these guys, honestly, probably completely insulated from being affected by this financially, and probably pretty happy with how their contracts are structured. So that's where the risk is on the player side, because they're risking that they're going to be able to get more money at the end of those contracts. And the teams are risking that maybe they'll have to pay a lot more money at the end of those contracts. So we'll see what these guys get. Laine next year, Point, Boeser, and Werenski the year after, as that restricted free agent market's going to be red hot 2 years from now. Colin White. So this is an Ottawa contract amongst a team that is nowhere near the salary cap. The interesting thing is this. $4.75 million is the lowest value on the board until 2025. And this was, they're trying to pay in advance for what White's going to be. This year was not a good one for Colin White. 61 games, 7 goals, 16 assists, 23 points. As the team gets better, as you're bringing in Stützle, as you're bringing in other star forward players, as your prospects graduate, what is his role going to be? And does this contract look better or look worse as a result? He's not due until 2025. And the interesting thing is there's no bonuses in his contract. So some of these have a lot of bonuses in them. Marner being one of those that there's bonuses too. Since there's no bonuses in Colin White's contract, let's say that Pierre Dorian sat down and said, White's not performing, says after next season. White's not performing and decides to buy him out. Without bonuses, it makes it a contract you can buy out. It's not an easy buyout because you'd have 4 years left, so that you're paying that penalty for 8 years after. But the amount of money that penalty adds up to is not cumbersome. It's not something that would really overly strap the Ottawa Senators. So it's a contract that might look worst on the board, but in reality, there's no risk to it because there aren't any no trade clauses. If Ottawa a year from now says White's not working out, somebody somewhere would look at that cap hit and say, we could take that on, or maybe Ottawa retains a quarter of it, whatever ends up happening, right? But it is interesting to look at, and it makes an even 10 players. So there you go. I just wanted to look at last year's restricted free agent market. We'll look at free agents from last year as well, and which ones worked the best and which ones maybe fizzled out. We can look over unrestricted free agents for years past and go through from 2019 and back. It's interesting to look at. So there you go. So which of these guys do you think gets paid the most when their contract's up? Laine in 2021, Point in 2022, Werenski in 2022. How much is Boeser going to be worth? And just let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.